Good morning. It is June 27th, 2025, and we have just gotten through our first big blast of heat here for the summer in Ohio, and it was most decidedly uncomfortable. High levels of humidity, very high temperatures for the time of year, and I think Dave Gardner would probably concur in general for the state of Ohio. Um, Seen some problems starting to arise on home lawns in particular. Brown patches most definitely started to fire up, and I think that's one that should not be misdiagnosed. It's almost gotten too hot for dollar spot in a sense. Brown patch also will create patches that are maybe a foot, 2 foot, up to 3 foot wide in diameter. And rather than having a constricted leaf like a figure eight, you will have more of a stain down the leaf tissue, and not straight lines that you would see with the dollar spot. Over irrigation is going to cause a problem there. Data recently, however, did show that you can fertilize to try and aim for some recovery. Traditionally, we've thought that the fertility part of it would drive further activity from the brown patch standpoint, but if I remember correctly, Jim Kearns down NC State lately did not see that with some of his work. Online today, we got Dr. Dave Gardner, Dr. Dave Shetlar, and Pam Sherratt. Dr. Gardner, weed update.
Well, so I have been working with an individual who has a landscaping company for about the last month and a half, and they emailed me and said that they have a client who had a big problem with nimblewill, and did I have any recommendations for the control of nimblewill? And a couple of our herbicides, mesotrione and topramazone, have some activity on nimblewill and Bermuda grass. I find it to be frustratingly inconsistent, though. Sometimes that'll work if you make three applications 3 weeks apart, sometimes not so much. But I got an email last week that said that it seemed to be growing out of it. And I was like, is it nimblewill or is it Bermuda grass? It probably doesn't matter. They're probably going to have to use glyphosate, but send me some pictures. And so she sent me a picture, and lo and behold, it's neither of those two. It's quackgrass. And so this is a reminder that while we do have some herbicides that can be pretty useful for the control of grasses, that you tend to have to identify correctly the grassy weed before targeting it with a herbicide. And so I should have known. I mean, in May, they said an aggressively spreading grass, which that's a little early for Bermuda grass, and I've never seen nimblewill aggressively spread. So I should have said, are you sure it isn't quack at the time? But sure enough, it is quackgrass. And so this is something that will become a little bit more noticeable now because it's a little bit more resilient in hot and dry weather. But to answer the question, is there such a thing as a herbicide that will selectively control quackgrass? And the answer is no. That said, we do have some grasses that we have selective herbicides for that are fairly effective for control. But again, step number one is to properly identify the grass. Make sure that you know what species you're dealing with. And that goes back to what I said last week when I was talking about, if you're going to use exclusively quinclorac, and you're not getting particularly good control, it might be because you're trying to control one of the grasses that quinclorac isn't so good on, such as goosegrass, Johnson grass, and etc. So again, the first step in proper grass management is to identify the species. And there are some morphological characteristics that you can use, but oftentimes, especially at this time of the year, if you just leave a small patch that's hidden unmowed for a couple of days, you'll get a seed head. That'll make it pretty easy to make the identification. Something else that's becoming pretty noticeable at this time of the year are the sedges. So these have an advantage in hotter, drier weather compared to cool season grass as well. And so yellow nutsedge. And then Kalinga is something that I'm seeing an increase of, but it's relatively slow. So yellow nutsedge is still the predominant problem here in the state of Ohio. But just a reminder that these are our options for sedge herbicides. So Basagran is a contact herbicide, but it's a strange one because usually in trials that I do at the OTF center, even though it's a contact herbicide, to me that implies that it would grow back after a period of time. But usually one application will be enough to give good control for the rest of the year. It's just the following year the plant will regenerate from the bulb that the herbicide didn't translocate down below ground and give you any control of. Sulfentrazone, marketed as, among other things, dismiss, is a very good option. Another one that is used quite commonly is sedgehammer. And I think one of the perceptions in the industry is that sulfentrazone is better earlier in the year and sedgehammer is better later in the year. I haven't necessarily seen that bear out in trials that I've done, but I hear people say that a lot. The other two options to consider are amazosulfuron, which is Solero, and then pyrimesulfan, originally marketed as a granule called Vexus. Now it is also marketed as a liquid formulation called Archon. Those products are particularly useful not only for the control of sedges and colingas, but also some of the weeds that we have trouble controlling with our conventional herbicides because of resistance issues like buckhorn plantain, for example, that is on the Archon label. I still haven't had the opportunity to test and make sure whether or not that works, but it's on their label, which implies that they have data that suggests that it does. Anyway, I have said this before, and I think people thought that I was being flip or that I was joking when I said no mow May should be no mow June. No, really, I mean it. No mow May should be no mow June. This is what the turf looks like at a retention pond a couple blocks down from my subdivision right now. That's bird's foot trefoil. It wasn't blooming in May. There were no pollinator services provided by not mowing at that particular time. But, the bird's foot trefoil, which to me, this is kind of pretty. You're seeing this used a lot in roadside right-of-way mixes, and it's also wonderful as a forage crop. And so this is starting to encroach into areas. It's easily differentiated from black medic because it has a much brighter flower in addition to its other, like the leaf looks like a bird's foot and etc. But important to note that all of these clover species perform fairly well at this time of the year. They struggle less in the heat and the drying soil compared to the cool season grasses, and they are all actively blooming. If you are trying to control these, clopyralid, if you're on a golf course, fluroxapyr are excellent options. Now, for reasons that are completely different, two separate companies had me do these trials for the last 2 years where I looked at basically deconstructed combination herbicides. So, you know how we usually mix our active ingredients together for broadleaf weed control? Well, they had me do 2,4-D by itself, MCPP by itself, dicamba by itself, MCPA by itself, and then compare that to combinations. And the interesting thing is that the perception out there is that MCPP is in that mix to control clover. And I can tell you that MCPP by itself does nothing. It's a fascinating thing. Actually, if anything, in some of my plots, there was more clover in the plots that I treated with MCPP than if I left them alone. Dicamba is the one that seems to do the heavy hitting. That said, the combination of 2,4-D and MCPP can be fairly effective, or 2,4-D MCPP and dicamba, better yet. But these are the herbicides that are good for the control of the clovers. And if it's trefoil, if it's white clover, remember that those are perennials. And so if you're trying to get rid of those, you're going to have better long-term success if you wait and apply ester-based formulations of those in the fall. Anything that you do now, you'll probably get suppression for 8 to 10 weeks, followed by rebound and recovery. And then you can go out and try to hit them again in the fall. On the other hand, if you do have black medic, remember that's a summer annual. And so if you spray that now, you can hopefully reduce the amount of seed that's produced so that you can reduce the problem that you have with that next year. And that's what I have for today.
Dave, I have one question on the sedge control materials. Is there seeding intervals for all of them?
Wow, and this is being recorded too. I'm almost positive that there is, and I'm pretty sure that those are 2 to 4 weeks. That said, most people shouldn't be trying to seed at this time of the year anyway. The only reason that I said right before this talk that I was watering new seed was because they ripped up my street and my curb and completely redid everything. And so they had to like dump dirt next to the curb and put down the hydro seed. And so it's like, great, thanks. Now I have to go out and water the edge of my yard 5 times a day for the next 4 weeks. But
and the place of doom.
And you'll get perennial ryegrass or annual ryegrass coming up probably.
yeah.
David, when it comes to the clover, I've always struggled with a little problem in mine at least the 3 ways that I get at the garden centers don't stick to the leaves. It could, or should you have a spreader sticker in any of those?
Are you talking when you spray or when you use a granule on fertilizer?
No, when I just spray it. I know weed control usually is better with sprays, but it just doesn't look like anything sticking to the leaves.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A spreader sticker might help, but you have to read the label. Sometimes in those pre-packaged formulations, they already have those
They have it,
materials
yeah.
included. And another thing, since we're talking about that, if we're talking about combination broadleaf herbicides, particularly the ones that include protoxin inhibitors, and so those are usually the herbicides that have 4 active ingredients instead of 3, carfentrazone, sulfentrazone, pyrofluoroethyl. If anything, the addition of a surfactant or a spreader sticker is likely to exacerbate the potential for those herbicides to cause some undesirable discoloration to the turf. It would be temporary, but it would, increase that potential.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner, handling the awkward questions. Pam Sherratt.
Good morning, everybody. So I just have one thing to share, and it is a picture. So hopefully you can all see that. So this time last week, I was coming back from Oregon. I was in the Corvallis area for a seed research camp. And so I just wanted to share this picture. It was a very cool visit. I got to see where, 70% of our grass seed worldwide is produced in this region of the United States. This particular area where I was, we was looking at cool season, but they also had a couple of warm season areas that they grew Bermuda grass, etc. But so this is, I guess I never really thought about how they harvest turf grasses, but it's just like you would harvest any other grass crop. If you look across the fields here, this was, acres and acres of turf grass that had just been harvested, and they lay it there. They let it lay out for a time while it dries, so that they can easily sift out the seed. So I just thought this was a really interesting picture. That particular area of the United States is beautiful. It's nestled. It's like in a valley area, nestled between in the Cascade Mountains, about 40 minutes from the Pacific coast. And anyway, so I thought that was fascinating. But so then that did lead me into what I wanted to talk about this week, and that is that we're entering into this really stressful period for cool season grasses. And as part of your tool bag and your arsenal for how you deal with stresses like disease and drought, please do talk to your seed supplier or do some investigation on your own about the new genetics that are out there. We have what we call the A list that is out there right now. These are grasses that have been identified as good performance in trials, but also low input / sustainable. Ohio State has the most A-list trials in the country right now. So again, you could just Google A-list and you can talk to your seed supplier about what those cultivars are, and they are, a range of different cool season grasses aimed at low input, low maintenance, sustainability, but also they perform well in trials. The National Turf Grass Evaluation Program is the gold standard. It's ntep.org. You can go and you can, for your interest, you can go and you can see how these different cultivars of grasses perform in trials across the country. I would say there's been marked improvement in plant breeding over the last 40 years. And I know sometimes it's difficult to adopt new cultivars if you're used to a certain mix or blend at your sports field or your golf course. It can be very difficult and a bit scary to switch cultivars, but have those conversations, do some investigation. As Dr. Nangle's already mentioned this morning, brown patch is prevalent right now on tall fescue. The plant breeders are doing work looking at more resistant varieties of tall fescue. For brown patch, Kentucky bluegrass seedling vigor is always front and center, especially those of you managing sports fields. So there are Kentucky bluegrasses now that not just germinate quicker, but also have greater seedling vigor, which is great for the industry. Disease tolerance in perennial ryegrass is always obviously a criteria for those of you managing predominantly perennial ryegrass fields and recreation areas, especially things like Pythium, brown patch, grey leaf spot. And of course, drought resistance. I know right now in Ohio, you might roll your eyes and say, why is she talking about drought resistance right now? But last year's not too long ago, if we all remember what last year was like, especially for our varieties of turf grasses like tall fescue, when we were showcasing our farm science review plots last year, the Kentucky bluegrass was completely dormant. The perennial ryegrass was just about dead. And the only one still hanging on and even slightly green under that severe drought was tall fescue. So anyway, just, I think it's worth a conversation. It's worth relooking at some of the genetics in turf grass. I think sometimes we don't think about that as being one of the tools to help with things like stress resistance, wear tolerance, establishment speed, traffic tolerance, all those types of things. They have made great strides in those areas. And one of the other things that I really liked about the visit was learning about the mixes that people are putting together. So, we're used to going to the big box stores and seeing things like shade mix, for example, or quick grass, where you can put something out, a patch of seed, and it will grow very quickly. But they are putting together these mixes and blends now specifically for high traffic areas of sports fields or situations like that. So again, I think that's worth mentioning. I'm not sure if Dr. Carr is going to have any of the A-list or NTEP trials labeled at our field day on August 5th. We can maybe report back on that next Friday. But those of you that are interested in the A-list or the NTEP trials, reach out to one of us. If you're a golf course super or a sports field manager and you want to come look, just reach out to us and we can meet you at the turf farm, and happy to show you around and show you some of those. Now, obviously come to field day if you can, because we can't do individual. We're not a museum, but we are happy to share our results with you. I was going to mention brown patch, but again, Dr. Nangle mentioned that this morning. Todd did put something out. He has a turfgrass pathology, OSU turfgrass pathology presence on social media. And he did talk about brown patch this morning with some photographs. He did mention the importance of putting a preventative out this time of year if you are professionally managing turf, especially brown, tall fescue ryegrass. But then once you see it, really need to switch to a more curative approach. So that's also what I wanted to mention. And then just a quick plug, we're about a month out from, no, not a month out, 6 weeks out maybe, from our field day. OSU field day is August 5th. The Olka field day is August 6th. We're all getting ready for those. We're going to have some great trials and great hands-on experiences for you in those two events. August 5th, August 6th, I believe, right, Dr. Nangle? So yes, hope you can come to those. And again, if you have any questions, just reach out. That's all I have today. Thank you, Dr. Nangle.
Thank you, Pamela. I was just confirming it was August 5th and 6th before I said yes. Okay. Dr. Shetlar, insect.
Pam, I just wanted to mention in that seed availability that you mentioned quite a bit about the fescues, tall fescue especially, and the perennial ryegrasses. Both of those can contain endophytes. And if you want to take advantage of that endophyte, make sure that you get recently harvested seed, because we do know that those grass species, when stored for more than a year, can have a significant loss of the endophyte in the seed. And so again, just a discussion with your supplier of what's the new cultivars, their mixes, and is it recently harvested material can really go a long way. I'm a real fan of the endophytes. They really knock down the chinch bugs, the caterpillars, and the bill bugs. You can take those three out with endophytes and reduce your need for an insecticide usage. Okay, speaking of the insects, Dr. Wu had mentioned last week, and I want to again reiterate for those of you golf course superintendents that are dealing with the annual bluegrass weevil, to be very cautious about using pyrethroids multiple times to knock down the adults. The new adults have emerged. They're visibly walking around, and you could see them. And I know superintendents often will panic with that and reach for the spray to knock those down. But again, we would recommend that you take a look at some alternatives to the pyrethroids. And those are listed on the fact sheet that Dr. Wu has posted on the annual bluegrass weevil. For the grubs, I'm still waiting. My mass chafers and my light trap have been way down. They were easily 3 weeks late, even showing up in my light trap. And for the last week, there's just sort of dabs and dribbles coming in. I think the maximum number I got in one night was about 12. And last year at about this time, I was getting maybe 100 in a night. So just kind of give you an idea. Not getting many reports about Japanese beetles either. So both of those are either major delayed or the saturated soils that we had in May did hit the pupae and maybe have drowned them. So this may be a year that we luck out, but I'm always kind of in favor of the bugs. They have a great capability of recovering. And it may be that they're just really late this year. So we'll just have to keep abreast of that. We did get a big emergence of the common armyworm, our native species. We've got an entomologist over in Lucas County that's running pheromone traps, and he said he was getting incredible numbers just this week of the common armyworm. I've been getting quite a few of them in my light trap. So the first generation of the armyworm has been completed and the adults are emerging. And sometimes, occasionally, we will get an outbreak of those armyworms affecting turfgrass in July. So be cautious. If you're in the lawn care and a homeowner calls up and says, my lawn seems to kind of disappeared last night, it may be that they've got common armyworms in that. And again, what we recommend is that if you do get that defoliation, bring out the sprinkler heads, irrigate that turf to keep the crowns moist and wet until they can recover with some turf cover. Other than that, I think we could be in for a fairly good year in terms of lack of major insect problems, but it's one of those things when people say, well, what are you predicting for the grubs? And I usually say, I'll tell you in September what happened with the grubs because they fooled me before showing up where they shouldn't show up and so forth. In an unrelated thing, I'm getting a lot of social media reports about turf grass as being the death of the fireflies, which is the furthest thing from the truth. As a matter of fact, our turf grass habitats usually creates good environments for snails and slugs, which are the primary food for the fireflies. And a lot of those fireflies, actually, the larvae inhabit our flower beds, not the turf grass. So can't blame it on the turf grass. We'll probably talk maybe a little bit more about that next week. Ed, that's all I've got in the bug world.
Thank you, Dr. Shetlar. Yes, this is an interesting topic. I think fireflies and timing of insect appearance and all those things should be left to someone like an expert who likes to taste them as well at times, right? The weather forecast, folks, is still on the warm side and plenty of moisture to go with it. So if you're having problems with things like weeds already, it's not going to help, right? With the disease activity that we've seen this week with brown patch in particular on tall fescue, and I'm sure there's multiple other issues simmering under the surface, whether it's anthracnose starting to fire up on annual bluegrass, summer patch, soil temperatures, you got to watch them. Once those soil temperatures start crossing that 83-degree threshold, you're going to see summer patch really fire up. And I did have one superintendent this week talk to me about the problem arising already with a level of frustration. So definitely start a time to start checking roots, looking for color of roots. Generally, if they're turning brown to black, you're probably not in a great shape, right? And so if you haven't vented for the last couple of weeks and you have a maintenance Monday built into the schedule, that probably is going to be one of those critical steps to try and get some oxygen down into that root zone. But it's also for the homeowners still going to be a time of year where you raise the mowing height, reduce the frequency of clip, and try not mow the hell out of your lawn, because it's not going to do you or the lawn any good when you have to reestablish it sometime in late August, early September. It's great for us because I'll take good pictures. The other thing I did notice was there's been plenty of homeowners, and I hesitate to say lawn care operators who've been out applying fertilizer, and there's misses. You can see some nice yellow lines and some nice dark green lines. And so recommendation there, particularly for homeowners, is that if you're making an application of fertilizer, that maybe you try to make a half. If the spreader setting says X, then make it half of that and go two directions, right? To try and equalize out your pattern. Otherwise, you may see some random funny talking dude on your lawn taking pictures going, ha, you screwed up your fertilizer application. With that, folks, we will leave it until next week. We may have some interference or change in time with the fact that Friday is the Independence Day holiday. We will discuss that between ourselves, and we will talk to you all next week. Thank you.